Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lord Gord Podcast. This is your host, Lord Gord. I'm giving you information that's factually correct and politically incorrect, because I've got it, baby, and I can't stand it either. Okay, that didn't make too much sense. But anyway, so this week, we're going to discuss lying and why truth and honesty are so important to not only individual relationships, but to civil society as a whole. So here's the basis of my podcast. This is where we're going off. People act on what they believe to be true. Because of that fact, lying is morally and intellectually reprehensible. Advancements in science, technology, history, and humanity in general have come from experimentation and finding out what is true and what works. Without the truth, humanity would still be in its natural state of brutishness and callousness, as it is impossible to run any functional social system on dishonesty. Therefore, it is a moral and intellectual imperative to be honest with yourself and others. The first pillar I'm going to talk about is the consequence of lying on an individual level. Because beliefs have consequences, and if one believes a lie, it will affect their behavior. So let me give you a quick example. I was working one day and I was talking with a beautiful young lady, so dashing, so gorgeous. And I was asking her about the kind of male attention she gets, and she said she gets quite a bit of attention. And she told me about a guy who had asked her out, and she told him that she was busy. And my response was, were you really busy, or did you just not want to go out with him? And of course, her true feelings were that she didn't want to go out with him. So the point I made to her was, one, you lied to him. And two, that was a detriment not only on yourself, because if he truly believes what you have said, he's going to ask you again. But it's a detriment to him because now he is operating under a pretense that isn't true. His view of reality is now warped because of what you said. And really pertaining to that whole issue in general, there's a quote that changed my life when I heard it on television many years ago. A man was on television and he said, when you tell the truth, it becomes your past. When you lie, it becomes your future. That literally changed the trajectory of my life at that point, because at the time I was involved with a young lady and it had pretty much run its course, and I had no intentions of building a future with this individual. But this was back in my cuckold days, so I wasn't brave enough or man enough to tell her exactly how I felt about the situation. So what I did was, I did like these young ladies do. They're mostly cowards, but instead of actually telling the person how I felt and what I wanted to happen, I just sabotaged the relationship. So I stopped, calling back, or I stopped paying attention to her. So what I did was I forced her hand so that she could break up with me, and I wouldn't have to deal with any of the ramifications of it, because I can just point back into her face, you're the one who broke up with me, even though I spearheaded that whole operation. So I was avoiding the whole thing. She wanted to talk to me. I just kept ignoring her and ducking her and dodging her. And once I heard that quote, I just went straight into the belly of the beast and told her everything that I had felt. I told her, I'm done. This isn't what I want for my future. I apologize for my immature and reprehensible behavior, but I never want to speak to you again. And I felt just a huge weight come off of my shoulders once I told the truth. It felt so good to just be honest, not only with myself, but with the other person. So they'd have no way to view the situation as anything other than what it is in actuality, unless they were delusional, because now they know the facts. So once they know the facts and they know the nature of reality, if they choose not to view reality as what it is, that's no longer my responsibility. That's their responsibility. And pertaining to that, I have a song written. I haven't really recorded it yet. It's called Cuckold. And the song, it pertains to a situation pretty similar to this. Essentially, it's a guy who likes a girl, and he's conflicted because he believes what the girl says at face value, but him doing so makes him appear to be a fool, because he is a fool. She's not interested in him, but she doesn't have the moral and intellectual fortitude to be honest with him. But then there's another part of him that knows that he's being played as a fool, and that knows he's a fool. So it's really a conflict between reality and what he desires, what he wants reality to be, what he projects onto her rather than what she projects onto him in reality in general. And also, when it comes to lying, it is impossible to move forward in a conversation or grow as an individual without honesty and truth. How can one know what to improve on if they don't know what the problem is? I've seen this so many times in my life. I talked about it in last week's podcast. You have a stonewaller. You know, if this person doesn't want to speak, how can you move forward with a relationship or a conversation if they don't want to speak honestly? I mean, I did podcasts about black crime, so on and so forth, and you can't talk about incarceration rates unless you talk about crime rates. So until you talk about crime rates, the conversation will remain stagnant. You won't go anywhere because you are not addressing the problem honestly. It's just a bunch of hot air being blown around to prop up the moral views and moral superiority of a certain populace. But I talked about that already. I'm not going to talk about that, okay? So long-lasting friendships are built on honesty and communication. So lying is antithetical to that. You know, I've never had a friend that I've been friends with for a long time in which we lied to each other very often. You know, if I feel like I can't be who I am with this person, or I can't speak honestly to this person, then they're not a friend. Because I'm not going to lie to someone, especially someone who I care about. And how can we really connect with each other as individuals if we don't know each other honestly? So there are some people that will say that you have to lie to be polite, but white lies are usually to the benefit of the liar, not to the person being lied to. The liar, in this case, gets to claim moral superiority for not hurting one's feelings, but the lie wasn't to the recipient's benefit, it was to the liar's. For example, say a fat person comes up to me and they ask me, am I fat? I'm going to be honest with that person. If they really are fat, I'm going to say, yes, you're fat. If they aren't fat, I'm going to say, no, you're not fat. Because based on what I say has long-term implications on whether I'm a trustworthy person to them or not. Because if they're actually fat and I tell them that they're not fat, they're not going to really have any incentive to change. That's one. And two, if they know that they're fat and they know that I'm lying to them, they're not going to ask me for advice in the future because I'm not giving them honest, constructive criticism. But also, if someone asks you, am I fat? And if you really don't want to answer, you're going to say, you know what, I don't want to answer the question. That's fine in certain instances. I wouldn't do that for the most part. I'd tell them, yeah, you're pretty fat. I've told people that before. And I've read so many, testimonies of individuals who lost weight after, admitting to themselves that they were fat. And they benefited from other people, especially friends, telling them that they are fat. Like if I had a wife, and she was getting fat, I'd tell her because I don't want a fat wife. And that's going to be a problem for me. And that's going to be a problem for her health in the short term and the long term. It's going to be a problem for our marriage too. Because if she can't get in shape, she's going to get some trail mix. And I'm going to tell her to take a hike, okay? All right. So, me personally, I choose to be honest because it is the morally and intellectually right thing to do. People that know me, they know my views, they know my philosophy, they know how I operate in the world. And when people like me, they like me for who I am, not for who they think I am. And when people don't like me, they don't like me for who I am. I'd much rather a person not like me for who I am than to like me for who they think I am. And that's how I've operated for years, especially with young ladies. I don't lie to them because I want them to know who I am as a person so they can make the best decision for themselves and for their future. Because that's how a lot of these relationships crumble. These women or men, either way, they think that this person that they're dating is the is the illusion that the person presented, is the farce that the person presented, but it's not. That person was completely different from who they presented themselves to be. So I make it an important aspect of my life to present myself as who I am, to present my views and my values as true to me, and then I let people make a decision from there. I'm going to make them make a decision based on what is true than what is not true. Okay? So I'm going to talk about the consequences of lying on a societal level. So most successful countries that are run on the planet, are run by competent governments that honestly uphold the law. Corrupt countries which have low levels of trust and high levels of corruption have slow economic growth, high rates of crime, less products, and less jobs. I talked about this previously, but countries like Bangladesh and Nigeria and Haiti and Russia that have very corrupt, inept governments, they are usually some of the most economically backward places in the world because business owners are living in a state of uncertainty. They don't know whose palms they'll have to grease. They don't know if law enforcement will protect their property, so on and so forth. It's hard to start a business when you can't trust the government to uphold property rights and to uphold the sanctity of the law, which is why we need that. In communities with high levels of trust, complex financial deals, lending, etc., are much easier to do because people believe that their cohorts are honest. You look at well-to-do economies in the world today: Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, South Korea, here in this country. The reason why we're able to grow wealth and to create goods and services is due in part because we have complex financial institutions in which we trust in. We have faith that they will do the right thing. The money will go where it's supposed to go. Investors will get their investments. They'll make the products, so on and so forth. That's not true in some of these other crap countries. But here's an example about trust and communities being a benefit to business. Hasidic Jews in New York's Diamond District would make verbal agreements with each other. A merchant's social and economic reputation would be destroyed if he were found to be dishonest. An untrustworthy society is a dysfunctional society. I mean, there's so many political movements that are based on lies. For example, they conflate the difference between tax cuts and tax rates. So you get a lot of these leftist politicians talking about tax cuts for the rich. The rich are being greedy. They're cutting taxes for the rich, and they're hurting you, hard-working American families, by cutting these taxes. But what they fail to explain, because they're liars, they're either ignorant or they're liars. What they fail to explain is that tax cuts and tax rates are different. Throughout Ronald Reagan's presidency, he cut tax rates, but he had record-breaking tax revenues every year that he was in office. If you look at countries around the world, there's a breaking point. When you raise the tax rate to a certain amount, the tax revenues go down because people stop paying it. Like if you go to Italy, the black market is so large because the taxes are so high. So they don't get nearly as much tax revenue as they would have if the tax rates were actually fair and people found them fair and they were willing to pay them. There's another thing I was hearing Thomas Sowell talk about in Detroit, in which every year that they raised the tax rates, the tax revenues went down. So that's a big lie. Another big lie is the whole police brutality thing. I cover that in my podcast. Black crime is wildly out of proportion. And it has serious ramifications when people believe that it's not the criminal behavior of black people that's the reason for them being in jail, but it's racist cops. There's so much hostility towards law enforcement that is really unwarranted, because the law enforcement is just doing their job. If black people don't want to get arrested so often, they should stop committing crimes more often. It's really that simple. Yeah, so lies on a societal level have serious consequences. People are really motivated by what they believe to be true. So like I'm saying, if people really believe that tax cuts hurt families, they're going to advocate for a policy that is counterproductive, because as I just said, tax rates and tax revenues are two different things. And oftentimes most of the time when you cut the tax rates, the tax revenues will increase. And when you continue to raise the tax rates, the tax revenues will decrease. I can also talk about, why truth and honesty are so important. All the products that we use, from the camera and the microphone that I'm using, to our automobiles, to our cell phones, to our electricity, to the buildings in which we live in, they are functioning properly because of people who sought out the truth. They use the methods of science to determine what is or what isn't true, what works and what doesn't work, and they go from there to build something that actually works. If you had someone building a bridge and they lied about the equations or the efficacy of the bridge, and the bridge falls apart, that's a lot of lies. A lot of lives that are wasted because of someone's dishonesty. But say you live in an apartment, the reason why, or a house, the reason why it's standing sturdy and it hasn't fallen apart is because people have realized what is true and what works, and they used the truth to build a functioning home that doesn't fall apart. So to me, it's just, it's not cohesive or comprehensive to me intellectually, in which people can be honest in one area of their life, but they're not honest in another aspect of their life, when all the things that we rely on them due to the efficacy of the product, which is due to the truth that people sought out to make a functioning product. So now I'm going to talk about when it's appropriate to lie. I don't think it's very appropriate to lie, but I mean, they're very extreme instances. If someone's looking for your mom because they want to kill her, are you really going to say, yeah, my mom's hiding in the back? That's really just common sense. I mean, if it's like a murderer looking for someone or something of that nature, yeah, I'm going to lie. But if it's something that isn't truly life or death, I'm not going to lie about it. It's really that simple. So my implications would be to be honest with yourself and to be honest with other people. Seek the truth in your own life and become a better person. Because when you're honest with yourself, that's when you can improve upon your abilities. When you're honest about your contributions, when you're honest about your efforts, then and only then can you change them in a way that is positive. And my man Jordan B. Peterson once said, the truth is something that burns. It burns off deadwood. And most people are like 95% deadwood. So I'm an arsonist in my life. I burn a bunch of deadwood. And there's just so many instances in my life in which I just burned off the deadwood and I became a better person for it. For example, say you're a guy and you like some girl. And the only time you talk to this girl is when you text her. And you believe that she likes you. So now you're operating in a fantasy world that isn't true, because had she actually liked you, you would see the evidence of that. So what is beneficial to you? Is it beneficial to understand that this woman is doing nothing for you, and that you should leave her alone and find a woman that'll actually do something for you? Or should you continue and indulge in a fantasy and give attention to a woman who does nothing for you? So that's it. Honorable people are very special people. It's very unfortunate that an honest, plain-spoken person is rare in society. And that, to me, shows that we have a much bigger problem with dishonesty and just lying, and people just not willing to tell the truth about certain issues, not able to be honest with themselves, with other people. Honest people should be a dime a dozen, but unfortunately they're not, and that, to me, is a huge problem in our society. So what you can do is be honest with people. If a woman is fat and she asks you if she's fat, tell her she's fat. If you're in a band and the drummer's drumming stinks, tell him that he has to improve on his drumming, so on and so forth. Thank you for listening or watching the Lord Gord Podcast. Next week, I'm going to talk about con games, the psychology of con games, how they're played, and a couple examples in the real world. As always, you can donate on Patreon, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes, share the Lord Gord Podcast, get the Lord Gord album, This Isn't TV. If you live in LA, come to the Blues Jam at the Airliner in LA, Lincoln Heights, every Tuesday night from 9 p.m. to midnight. It's free admission, dollar tacos. It's a good time, okay? I'm Lord Gord, and I'll see you next time.